Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen. Welcome to CCJ 3701 Research Methods. You'll notice there's really only one video for this lab. And I'm sure some of you are going to panic. You're going, oh, we're doing regression and we only have one lab video? That's scary. Well, again, this is representing some of that movement away from professor-led and professor-guided instruction to more self-guided, and where you can start to problem solve and demonstrate proficiency and independence on your own. So when I'm not walking you through click by click, what do you know how to do? Okay? But I will give you some tips and some help and ways to check your answers so you can make sure you're on the right track. These are the exact kinds of steps you're going to be doing for your research paper. So these last two labs, this is your second to last lab. Lab 8 is your final lab. So then no more labs, yay! You'll be finally done with your training and ready to apply all these skills to your paper. So let's jump into this lab, and I encourage you not to open up the lab or be in the data quite yet, but you may just want to write down or jot down some notes in a document that you can refer back to when you get ready to work the lab, okay? That's how to use this video. All right, so again, you're in the General Social Survey data, the full version General Social Survey 2008 for students. And first, you are asked about a certain thing you want to know, which would be your topic, right? So you're told, we want to predict how much education a person receives by knowing other things about them, their gender, their religious orientation, how they feel about spanking. We want to know if these things are related and how. So we need to prepare variables for analysis and run a regression. This is exactly what's going to happen in your final paper. Okay, you're going to take all these steps, run actually a couple of regressions, and then report on the things that you found out. So the first part is we're going to create some variables, okay? We're going to create a new variable called spanking agree disagree. This is actually a control variable. So sometimes you have to prepare your data before you analyze it. And in order to do that, you notice I didn't give you a variable to use. You have to find it, okay? So this is, again, that experience in opening up a data set in SPSS and using Control F and searching on something like spank and seeing what you can find in there. Happen to be right on the row, okay? So it's actually row 681. There is your spanking variable. It's actually called spanking, so it's pretty easy to find. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing you're going to have to do is you need to go find your topics in a data set. I'm not always going to just give you a variable name. You got to get used to searching the labels and the fields to find what you need. Okay? So, right here, we have our spanking variable, and you're going to do all the same stuff you would do to recode any variable. You read through the code book about it, you get to know the label, run a frequency on it, check the value labels, find out what kind of data you have. Right here, once you open the value labels, we learn that this is an ordinal style variable, okay? Strongly agree, disagree, and so forth. It's an opinion, and we can rank people's opinions on how much they feel one way or another against each other. So it's ordinal kind of information in here, okay? So inside this coding, here's your tip or your trick. You want a variable that just says, do you favor spanking or not? So in these value labels, you can use more than one category to set in the favor group and more than one category to set in the I don't favor. So we'll use the 1 and 0 coding, right? Strongly agree and agree would both favor it, one favoring a little bit more, okay? You can put those as your 1s. Disagree and strongly disagree, the 3s and the 4s, those would be your I don't favor spanking. We can put them as the 0s, okay? So that's a hint to help you with developing your coding scheme. And don't forget to take care of these missing values, your 0s, 8s, and 9s, and set them aside as missing, or it's going to screw up your variable. So once you have that variable built, and you run your analyses, and check it, make sure it's right, the answer to number 2, I'm going to give you some of the answers so you can check your work, is 950 people, or 47% of people favor spanking. Once you have that new variable built, you should have 950 that say favor. That's how you know you did it right. Okay, in the next question, it says run a regression that assesses whether or not spanking affects the number of years of education a person gets, net of, or taking into consideration whether they're female and whether or not the person's fundamentalist. So you're like, oh, this is kind of different than what was before. But first, before we get too carried away with what it is, we need to identify the variables and the role they play in our research question and in our regression we're going to run. So you need to tell me which variable is the dependent, which one's the independent, and which variables are the control variables. So again, little hints. The dependent is the outcome, or what we want to find out. The independent is usually the first variable that gets mentioned, okay, the primary one that we think predicts it. And then the other variables later on in the mention are usually the control variables. They're not as important, that's why they got mentioned last. So using that information, you should be able to identify which variable is which, independent and dependent. Because if you don't know which is which, you're not going to be able to run a regression because it requires you to know. Okay? Also, I don't tell you whether or not you should mess with any of these other variables. That's a decision you're going to have to make based on what you learned in the regression lectures. So first of all, the education variable is an interval variable. Let's go find it in SPSS. So if you search on, do a control find education, okay, there's lots of different questions about education, okay, and this one I'll help you with a little bit more because there's so many, okay. It says it's not found. Tell you what, we're going to go here, put your cursor in the name field. There's actually several questions that ask about education. Hit Control F, just type in EDUC, okay. I'm not going to do education, just EDUC. Find next. And then hit find next again. Eventually, you're going to be brought to a variable that's on row 158 that says education. It says highest year of school completed. The reason we couldn't find it by searching on education is because the word education is not found in this label. It says highest year of school completed. So you could have also searched on school or something like that. So when you look at this variable, people click on the value label, see what's in it, they go, "Ooh, there's no value labels," and they start to freak out. All they see is 97, 98, 99, and that's it. So it looks like there's nothing in the variable. Remember, interval variables are never labeled. The number is what the response is. So don't freak out. They always have value labels, either none or they just have the missing data. That's it. That's very typical of interval variables. So EDUC, let's actually run a frequency of it, and then you'll see what's in there. So go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and Frequencies. Put your cursor in your variable box, type EDUC, and you'll find it. It's about first probably quarter of the data. Plop it in there, click OK. In our output, you can see there's a lot of responses in here. Okay, they actually go from 0 all the way to 20. So that's 0 years of education, or 0 school year all the way to 20 school year. This variable is what's the highest year of school you completed. You can kind of assume that 12 years of school completed is a high school diploma. That 16 years of school completed is essentially high school plus a 4-year bachelor's degree, and then anything over that is going to be graduate study. Okay, that's what's inside this variable. Okay, but it is interval. It's actual numbers of how many years of school you've done. Okay, so does it need to be recoded? I don't know. Depending on what variable it is in your equation, a dependent variable that is measured a certain way for linear regression, it has to be either nominal, ordinal, or interval. So I'm not going to give it away, but that's what you're going to have to think about, whether or not this variable needs to be recoded. Okay? So you have to think about, how does the dependent variable always have to be in order to run a linear regression? It has to be measured a certain way. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. On the gender question, male, female, or on the religion question, being fundamentalist or not, let me show you those variables. Okay? So gender, you're going to find under the variable called SEX. We'll put our cursor in that area, hit Control F, just type in SEX, and you'll have to hit find next a few times. The variable is literally called SEX. Okay, that is the gender variable. So there's lots of other variables that ask about sex, if you got paid for sex, if you're homosexual, and so on and so forth. Finally, you get to row 664, which is sex. And it says respondent sex, indicating what is their gender. You've used this variable before in past labs. Here are the value labels. 1 is male, 2 is female. Well, we are specifically interested in females for our study. So that's the group we're interested in, that we're going to want to recode this variable. This one you want to recode. So you'll want to make your females a 1 and your males a 0. Okay. Let's look at the last variable, fundamentalist. That variable is actually FUND. So hit Control F again with your cursor in the name field and type in FUND. Hit Find Next. You'll eventually be brought to row 223, which is fundamentalist. And it says how fundamentalist is R currently, or is the respondent currently. Let's look at the value labels on that. So here we have fundamentalist, moderate, liberal, I don't know, excluded, not applicable, okay? So in this variable, we have to actually set aside our fundamentalists compared to everybody else. So do you think you have to recode this one or not? So I'm going to leave that to you to decide if it needs to be recoded and how it needs to be recoded. This is basically a nominal variable. Gender is also a nominal variable, okay? So I made some other lecture points inside the last few lecture notes, part 4 and part 5, that told you about how we handle nominal variables when we're running linear regression. So if you don't know the answer to that, you might want to look at that part again. Okay? So once you have all your plans made and you've coded or not coded the variables you need, everything's ready to go. You're ready to run your regressions. If you run your regressions correctly, you will get output that looks like this. Okay? So these are the things you pay attention to. I know this is your first regression, maybe some of you have ever run, and you don't want to screw it up, so let's walk you through a few pieces so you know. So once you have all your variables inside your queue, again, when you run a regression, you're going to go to Analyze, and then Regression, and then choose Linear. This is where you have to put in your variable that's the dependent variable. You got to put in your variables that are your independent variables, and essentially stack them in there, including the control variables. Once everything's in there, you click OK, and you get output. Okay? So again, the output, you'll get a model summary that has this kind of information. You'll get an R-squared that says 0.030. Here's your famous ANOVA box, and then you get the coefficients box. This is something I like to do whenever I get output. I'll say, okay, there's my constant, and I'll circle that. That's my y-intercept. Here's all my little coefficients for each of the variables. There's the favoring spanking, the fundamentalist, the female variable. I'm kind of giving away whether or not you should recode it or not. Okay? And there's all the coefficients. And I remind myself, what is my dependent variable? It's years. Okay? Highest year of school completed. How many years have I done? And then significance levels over here. And I remind myself, this is significant, this one isn't, this one is. But I'm kind of giving away some of the other answers of the lab, letting you see them in advance. But it's important to check your work to make sure you're doing it right. So if you do it correctly, you should be getting these kinds of answers. And again, marking your output this way or making notes to yourself really do help you when you get ready to interpret. So the pieces you need to put statistically are all these B coefficients and this constant of 13.8. Whether or not there's significance, what level, and the R-squared. That's all your statistical stuff. The substantive stuff of what it all means is the interpretation. So what does negative 0.530 mean? You know, what do we write if it's not significant? Well, if a variable's not significant, that's all we say, this variable is not significant. And then we move on, because there's no point in interpreting this coefficient of what it actually means in years if it's not significant. We can't rule out chance it's actually true. Okay, but essentially that's what you're going to be getting in your output. So I will kind of stop the video here and let you have at it. Please feel free to reach out to me. This is one of your more challenging labs you have. Notice the last page of the lab, I actually have this piece of paper that says interpretation hints. Your R-squared is this. It's your variance in y explained by your model. What's your model? It's all your independent and control variables put together. And it reminds you, these are your coefficients, your b. They represent an average change in y associated with the unit change in x. This is what the constant is. Here's a reminder of all your significance levels, all your p levels, 0.05, 0.01, 0.001. So that way you kind of have some of your tools you need for interpretation close by in your lab. Okay? So go for it. Really just attack this lab with everything you have, and use partners and classmates to check, and reach out if you need help. Good luck.